Imagine you're handed one absolute unbreakable constraint as a military commander. If you move a $10 billion nuclear-powered supercarrier through a specific 16-mile stretch of water, you risk losing the entire ship before the war even begins. The strait is exceptionally narrow, the threat is mathematically undeniable, and a Nimitz-class supercarrier is simply not an asset you gamble on a coin toss. So, the Pentagon made a choice that sounds completely insane to anyone who doesn't understand naval warfare. They chose to go around an entire continent instead. We are talking about a detour of more than 10,000 miles, costing millions of dollars in operational expenses and resulting in weeks of delay. The USS George H.W. Bush CVN-77 sailed south from Naval Station Norfolk, rounded the Cape of Good Hope, and crossed the Indian Ocean just to arrive safely in the United States Central Command Area of Operations. When it finally arrived, it completed a massive combat formation the United States hadn't used in over 20 years. 3 independent carrier strike groups, 3 distinct axes of attack, every single maritime approach to Iran, effectively sealed off. The USS Gerald R. Ford CVN-78 held the western flank from the Red Sea. The USS Abraham Lincoln CVN-72 controlled the southern approach from the Arabian Sea and the Strait of Hormuz. And now, the Bush established a third axis from the southeast, operating deep in the Indian Ocean. But if you think bringing in 3 aircraft carriers means the United States solved its weapons problem in the Middle East, you need to stay with us, because the terrifying math waiting at the end of that journey proves the exact opposite. There is a 16-mile stretch of water between the Atlantic Ocean and the Middle East that changes the entire calculus of global power. The shortest route runs through the Mediterranean and down the Suez Canal, roughly 6,000 miles. But the Bush didn't take it. At the bottom of that route sits the el-Mandeb, barely 16 miles wide at its narrowest point. From the Yemeni coastline, Houthi forces have turned this narrow waterway into a layered kill zone. Anti-ship ballistic missiles dropping from the upper atmosphere at supersonic speeds, sea-skimming cruise missiles hiding in radar clutter, explosive drone boats hunting anything large enough to reflect a signature. A supercarrier is the largest moving object on the ocean. It displaces 100,000 tons. 16 miles of channel gives you almost zero room to maneuver. Make no mistake, CVN-77 is a floating fortress. It could fight its way through, but this decision wasn't based on fear. It was based purely on mathematics. Every SM-6 missile fired during that transit is one fewer available for the actual mission. Burning high-end interceptors in a defensive gauntlet with no strategic value is pure waste. So CVN-77 went around Africa, 11,500 miles, 23 days at sea. With a full strike group, the daily operating cost sits between $6 and $8 million. That means the detour cost upwards of $185 million before the fleet even fired a single weapon. While the Bush made that journey, the 2 carriers already on station were under strain. The Ford had taken damage from an onboard fire, still operational but stretched. The Lincoln had been pulled from the Indo-Pacific just to fill the gap. These were strategic assets taken from 2 different oceans and concentrated into one theater. By the time the Bush arrived, the point wasn't the number of carriers, the point was geometry. Imagine a guard protecting 2 entrances. Manageable. Now add a third attacker from a completely different direction. The guard cannot cover all 3 at once. That is exactly what happened to Iran's air defense network. Before, it tracked 2 primary vectors. Now it had to track 3. Radar coverage expanded, processing load increased, response time slowed, and in modern air combat, milliseconds decide everything. A surface-to-air system needs roughly 3 to 5 seconds to generate a firing solution. Add even 2 seconds of delay, and an FA-18 Super Hornet flying at Mach 0.9 has already moved miles across the sky, potentially outside the engagement envelope before a missile even launches. The blind spot isn't physical, it's temporal. Carrier Air Wing 7 brought more than 70 aircraft to the fight, including Super Hornets, EA-18G Growler for jamming, and E-2D Hawkeye providing targeting data. But the number of aircraft matters less than the angle of approach. Even a small force arriving from an unexpected vector can be more lethal than a larger force attacking head-on. 3 carriers created a geometry Iran could not solve. But keeping a carrier alive means constant motion. It cannot stop, it cannot anchor, it cannot become predictable. That requires a full logistics chain. Ships like the USNS Arctic transfer fuel and supplies at sea while both vessels are moving. This allows the carrier to remain operational without ever entering port. Its defensive bubble is provided by escorts like the USS Mason DDG-87 using the Aegis combat system. Layered defenses include SM-6 interceptors, SM-2 missiles, and CWIS systems as the last line of defense. Then comes the directed energy layer, the Locust laser system. Powered by nuclear reactors, it has effectively unlimited ammunition. As long as the ship has power, it can keep firing. But physics imposes limits. Thermal blooming bends the beam, reducing effectiveness over distance. Locust is a point defense system. It cannot replace the missiles already spent. And that leads to the real problem, magazine drain. Roughly half of the combined THAAD and Patriot interceptor inventory has already been used. Tomahawk missile stockpiles are down significantly. These are not systems you can replace quickly. Replenishment timelines range from 1 to 4 years. On paper, the situation looks like dominance. Radar networks are strained. Geometry favors the United States. Logistics are holding. But inventory is shrinking. And those carriers came from somewhere. The Lincoln was pulled from the Indo-Pacific, the Bush from the Atlantic. That leaves fewer assets near critical regions like the Taiwan Strait. The Navy is powerful, but it cannot be everywhere at once. Every interceptor used here is one not available elsewhere. Every week spent in this theater leaves another uncovered. And the most important observers are not the ones launching attacks. They are the ones watching quietly, tracking stockpiles and waiting. Because perfect local dominance can create global vulnerability. 3 carriers in one region is not just power, it is a signal. This fight is consuming resources at scale. The United States can win this battle. The real question is, while it wins here, who is watching the rest of the world?